Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. I haven't done a wrap up in quite a while, I think since January, and I thought it would be fun to do a little wrap up of what I read in May and in June because I read quite a few things, but I was really excited to talk about both of those months. I feel like both of those were really good reading months. So I thought I would just share what books I read in May and June and some brief thoughts on them. I may have more to say about some of them than others, but I just thought I would pop on and share with you what I read and kind of a brief review of each of them. So let's jump into it. Okay, so I read 12 books in May, and the breakdown is I read 8 audiobooks and 4 physical books, with 66.7% being fiction and 33.3% being nonfiction. So the first one that I want to talk about is Margaret and the Mystery of the Missing Body by Megan Milks. So this was one that I actually read for my book club in May, and it was an interesting book. I rated it 3 stars because there were things that I really liked about it and things that I didn't love about it. So the story followed Margaret as a child first, and the club that she created with her friends where they solved mysteries, and they actually solved some like real life mysteries, which was kind of funny, but it's also very like weird in that there's like a magical realism element to it, and things happen that obviously would not happen in the real world. So it kind of felt like a Nancy Drew kind of vibe, but with some supernatural things going on as well. And it was fun in the first section, but then it transitions into a section where Margaret is in a treatment center for her eating disorder, and it follows her experience there and the other people that she meets there, and a very strange kind of magic school bus going inside the human body vibe like journey that they take. And it also explores her gender expression and friendships. So it is an interesting novel in concept, and I liked the first half a lot, but the second half was just not as much for me personally. I just didn't connect with it a ton, and it was pretty weird, and I love a weird book, but it just didn't hit the way that I wanted it to, and it just wasn't a favorite of mine. So those things combined, I did give it a 3 star because I felt like it was kind of mid, and I tend to give things 3 stars if there are equal things, good and bad, that I liked or didn't like about it, or if it just felt like a middle of the road book. So this was a situation where I liked as much as I didn't like. Next, I read Wake Up and Open Your Eyes by Clay McLeod Chapman, I think. This is a rare occurrence where I read something written by a man, but this book was recommended by a book club friend of mine, and oh boy, was this one of the most horror books that I have read, to be honest. It was so much. So this one follows an outbreak essentially that happens to everyone who watches Fox News and all of a sudden they all start going absolutely insane and turn into these like weird creature monster things, and they're killing each other and they're like hurting themselves, and it's just, the body horror is absolutely unhinged. It's very heavy on like the political aspects of it, obviously, and about mind control, and they repeat this whole thing of wake up and open your eyes. That's like the thing that these people say, monsters, whatever you want to call them, that's what they say. And it is very disgusting and gross and weird, and I did have a really fun time reading it, but it was a lot. I was completely gripped throughout the novel though. I like listened to it on audiobook like all in one day, and then I had to like stare at a wall for a while because it was like seriously one of the grossest body horror books I've ever read. I don't normally read that type of horror. I usually read like literary horror with a focus on female characters, and there's like, you know, social commentary. Obviously this had social commentary, but it was kind of different in some way. I don't know exactly how to describe it. I guess I just don't normally read body horror written by men, and usually it's more of like a literary horror type of book. So this was a little bit different for me. And I gave it 4 stars because I did enjoy it, but it grossed me out, seriously. And I know that was like the point of it, but it was just a lot for me. So I couldn't in good conscience give it 5 stars, but I did enjoy it. Next up, I read Motherthing by Ainsley Hogarth. So I've heard so many good things about this author and this book, and I just unfortunately didn't love it. Honestly, I'm sort of forgetting what it's about already, which is not a good sign, but I know that it's a horror book about a couple, and the husband's mom dies and he's falling into this deep depression, and the main character is trying to get him out of that depression and basically like lies and says that she's pregnant to make him feel better, and there's a lot of like weird supernatural horror things happening in it. And to be honest with you, I just didn't find it to be compelling, and I didn't think that the horror was particularly exciting or amazing. I don't know how else to articulate that. It just wasn't for me. I gave it 2 stars because really a 1 star to me is like DNF or literally no one should read this, and I did not feel that way. I just felt like I didn't really like it personally, and so that's where like my 2 star comes in, if I just didn't like it, but I don't think it's like an abhorrent book. And this is really disappointing because I've heard so many good things about it and people seem to really like it. And I guess I was already sort of not in the mood for her writing style because I did try to read another one of her books. I can't remember the title of it, but I will put it here. I tried to read that and I did not like it and ended up DNFing it, and then, tried to read Motherthing after that and just was not a fan. So personally, it's not for me. Okay, moving right along. The next thing I read was The God of the Woods by Liz Moore. So this was a book that I have heard so much hype about online, and I put it on hold on Libby from the library months ago when I first found out about it earlier in the year, and the hold finally came in and I was so excited about it. And I started reading it and I just felt like the pacing was off. I didn't feel like it was particularly thrilling or compelling. The whole mystery of it all, the reveal of it all was just not good. I didn't think that they like built enough tension up to it, and the reveal was sort of like anticlimactic. Like I just didn't think that it had the structure of a thriller that I was looking for. When I'm reading a thriller, I'm looking for it to absolutely grip me. I'm looking for it to be all I want to do, all I want to read the whole day until I finish it. Like I'm just looking for something that is going to absolutely grip me, and I want something fast-paced. I want something with a crazy twist. If I'm just looking for a thriller, that's what I'm looking for. Now, I think Liz Moore's books are a little bit more, maybe more towards literary than just thriller, but I'm pretty sure that they're still considered like thrillers. But when I was going into it, I was looking for it to be like a straight up thriller. I wanted it to like punch me in the face. Like I wanted a crazy twist, and it just did not give that. So unfortunately, it was not a favorite of mine. I did give it 3 stars because I felt like it was sort of a mid book. It wasn't like actively a bad book or something that I did not like or hated. It just didn't give me what I wanted it to give me, so it kind of fell somewhere in between. Okay, the last book that I don't physically have to show you that I read in May is You Didn't Hear This From Me by Kelsey McKinney. So this was a buddy read with my best friend, and it is a nonfiction book which talks about gossip. So there was some like actual data in the book, but a lot of it was more anecdotal or just like social study type of things. So lots of discussion of how gossip is portrayed, how people feel about gossip, whether gossip is good or bad, and why we think it's bad, particularly to do with religion and the Bible and what is, told about gossip, and how gossip is like one of the worst sins according to Christianity. So that was really fascinating. I loved that section. Overall, I just thought it was a really good and comprehensive look at gossip and how we are socialized to believe that gossip is bad. But it also didn't necessarily give the impression that gossip was 100% good and that we should be gossiping. It left room for some nuance there, which I really liked. But I did like the point that gossip is a way that we keep each other safe and the way that we communicate important information to each other, especially as women, though it did touch on how men do gossip quite a bit as well. But it was sort of touching on this idea that women are known to gossip, or that's who we generally assume is gossiping, and it's portrayed really negatively in the media when women gossip, but it is a way for us to share information with each other, specifically historically, that we needed to be able to communicate those things to each other so we could keep each other safe, because there wasn't any other safeguards to keep ourselves safe. So that was super, super interesting, and I really, really did enjoy this book. I gave it 4 stars, which honestly for me, a lot of nonfiction gets 4 stars because I feel like 5-star books are like absolute favorites, and a nonfiction book sort of has to transcend just like the learning aspect for me to consider it a 5-star read. It has to be like really impactful and meaningful in my life, just as a fiction book would be, and it is a little bit harder to get there as a nonfiction, so I did give this one 4 stars. Okay, so we might as well continue with nonfiction since we're already here. The first nonfiction book that I have physically to show you that I read in May is Screaming on the Inside by Jessica Gross. So I read this as part of a TBR takedown video, and I read it on audio, but I do physically have it. And I have to say, I was a little bit bored by this. I don't think that it was a bad book by any means. It was shedding light on the unsustainability of American motherhood, talked a lot about like historical things to do with motherhood, the Victorian era, how, you know, we've changed over time in our expectations of mothers, but a lot of things have also stayed the same. Talks about technology, talks about going back to work after having a baby. It brings up a lot of important subjects on motherhood, and I thought that was really great. However, I didn't feel like it actually said anything new that I haven't heard before, which was a little bit disappointing. That being said, I gave it 3 stars because I thought it was generally informative, but it also didn't give a whole lot of data. It was a lot of anecdotal evidence, which is still fine, but I was expecting it to be a little bit more data driven and more comprehensive in that way, and I just didn't feel like it did what I wanted it to do. So I just gave it 3 stars. Next up, I finally finished Careless People by Sarah Wynne Williams. This is a book about Sarah Wynne Williams. It's a memoir about her experience with Facebook and working at Facebook corporate, and her commentary on Mark Zuckerberg and the people that she worked with and the work environment of Facebook. So definitely like an expose vibe, kind of similar to Christy Coulter's book Exit Interview, which talked about Amazon and Jeff Bezos. So similar vibe. I started this back in March and finally finished it in May because I was reading this with my dad, and we were sort of taking it at a pretty slow pace, which was okay because I had lots of other things I was reading, but I finally pushed through and finished it in May. It's also kind of a chunkier book. Also just not a very fast-paced book. I did like it. I thought it was interesting, but it just wasn't super compelling in sections. There were a lot of like tech-specific things, and I didn't find those things as interesting as some of her like life, other aspects of her life story. Like there's a whole section on her childhood and like a shark attack that she was in and the insanity of the way that her parents treated it. And there's also a lot about like her birth trauma from her daughter and delivering her, and like the health conditions that followed that, and those things were so interesting to me. And also when she explored being a woman in the workplace, but when it came to a lot of the specifics on the politics of Facebook and the tech aspects, it fell a little flat for me. So that being said, I did give this one 3 stars as well because it was, you know, equally good as it was bad in certain areas for me personally, but I did enjoy a lot of it. So I ended up giving it 3 stars, and yeah, it was really fun to read a book with my dad. Okay, the last nonfiction that I read in May was Dead Weight by Emmeline Klein, Essays on Hunger and Harm. So this was an essay collection on disordered eating, body image, and actually had a surprising amount of statistics about healthy weight and what is actually a healthy weight according to like more recent science, specifically as it relates to women, because a lot of the science that was put out about BMI and things like that, well, 1, it was a long time ago, and 2, it was mostly based on men. So I loved the amount of like information and statistics that was in this book, but also I really liked some of the anecdotal stuff and the more, you know, personal aspects of it. I highlighted the heck out of it. There were so many passages that I want to come back to and I thought were really profound and interesting. It is a hard book to read in some sections, so I will say that if you are someone who has struggled with disordered eating and is sensitive to those topics, maybe this one isn't for you at the moment, but I found it deeply helpful with some of those things, so it's really up to you and whether you can handle that. But for me, I really liked it, and I thought that it was really really well done. It felt honest, it felt raw, it did not feel like it was glorifying any of those conditions. So I really, really, really liked it. And this is one of those rare instances where I gave a nonfiction book 5 stars. Okay, moving right along, I have 4 fiction books to share with you that I read in May, and then we can move on to June. First up, I read Blob by Maggie Sue. I listened to this on audio, but I do own a copy. This book follows a woman named Vi, and she is working at a hotel, and she sort of feels directionless and purposeless a little bit, and she's outside of a bar, and she finds this blob. It's a weird looking blob thing with eyeballs, and she's there with a friend of hers, and she ends up taking the thing home with her. And she also dealt with a breakup somewhat recently and is struggling with that, and as she's sort of talking about that and thinking about her ideal man, the blob turns into a man. I had expected, because of the weirdness of the premise and because it is about a blob, I expected a lot more weirdness from it. It's interesting to me because the blob actually does take kind of a back seat in the novel. The first little bit is about, you know, her finding the blob and it turning into this man, but the majority of it is about her family relationships, her experience as a Asian American, and these relationships with friends that she has, and how she's sort of an unlikable person. And those things aren't necessarily bad things. I think if this had been marketed a little bit differently, and maybe even without the blob at all, I feel like this would have been a more compelling story if we had just delved deeper in her unlikability, into her family dynamics, into the ways in which she hurts her friends and family by neglecting responsibilities and neglecting them. I think that would have been a more compelling premise and idea. The execution of this just fell flat for me. It didn't get weird enough for it to be a weird book that it wants to be, but it didn't dive deep enough into those family things to feel like a family story or a really intense, unlikable narrator story. It was sort of trying to do 2 different things and didn't do either of them in a super compelling way. And since I was coming into this looking for weirdness, I was just disappointed by that and ended up giving it 3 stars. Okay, next up is another book that I read for a different book club, and that is A Sunny Place for Shady People by Mariana Enriquez. I already had this on my shelf because I love Enriquez, and I bought this immediately when I knew it came out. I read it in like a day and, you know, rated everything with the stars like I normally do with short stories. I found out about the book club like a day before it was supposed to be, and so I read this whole thing in a day and just like sat down and listened to the audiobook and read it, which was such a fun experience, by the way. I don't usually like listening to audiobooks for short stories, but when I was like immersion reading it and reading it physically and listening to it, I was able to get such a better comprehension of it and really, really liked it. So that is how I read this one, and like all of her other books so far, she blew me away. I loved all of these stories. I mean, not every single one, but most of them I really, really loved. And even though the average rating would not have been 5 stars, I still gave it 5 stars because there were so many stories in here that were so compelling. And I just love her style. I love the supernatural and the grotesque and the gothic all combined into her stories. I just think that she is such an incredible author, and the translation is always spot on. I mean, I don't know Spanish, so I couldn't read the other one, but it feels authentic to her, and you can tell that they have a good like working relationship, and that the translator knows her work really well. So that being said, I loved it. I thought it was great, and I am so glad that I read it when I did, because I had it on my shelf for a while and was like, eventually I'll get to it. So it was really nice that there was like an actual push for me to read it. Okay, these last 2 I'm going to talk about briefly, since I feel like I've talked about them a lot recently, and they're both cannibal books, and they are The Lamb by Lucy Rose and Tender is the Flesh by Agustina Bastarrica. I also read this one as part of my TBR takedown, and I absolutely loved it. I gave it 5 stars. I loved the use of cannibalism as a metaphor for love, the exploration of mother-daughter relationships and childhood trauma. There's just so much good stuff in this book, and I'm absolutely obsessed with it, and I gave it 5 stars. And then with Tender is the Flesh, I read this with my husband actually, which was really fun. We normally don't read books together, but this was one that we had some overlap and interest on, so we ended up reading it together, and it is a lot. It's about the meat industry, it's about capitalism, it is about the treatment of women, it's about so many different things, and is so intense. But essentially it is about what would happen in a dystopian world where animals are no longer safe to eat, and the government sanctions eating people, and so people begin to be farmed and treated as we treat our animals that we eat now. So very intense, a lot of commentary in this one, and I also wrote a whole long thing on Substack, again, linked below if you were interested in my full thoughts on this one. Okay, so those were all of the books that I read in May. Now let's jump into my June reads. In June, I also read 12 books. In this instance, though, I read 9 audiobooks and 3 physical books. And I read 91.7% fiction and 8.3% nonfiction. That's to say I only read 1 nonfiction book. So starting off with that nonfiction book, it was Sociopath. I gave this one 2 stars. I thought that I was gonna really, really love it. The concept was really interesting to me, getting inside the brain and the life of a sociopath, but it was super heavy-handed with the word sociopath. She called herself that a million times. She used it to justify a lot of behavior, and instead of it feeling like a book that was shedding light on sociopathy, it just felt like it was an excuse to justify bad behavior and to sort of validate her experience, which, you know, to each their own, I get it, but for me personally, I just wasn't a fan. The section where she talks about her childhood was really interesting, but as she went throughout her life and was basically just committing crimes and saying, oh, I'm a sociopath, so, you know, it's fine, I just didn't love it. Now, I saw some very weird things online about the credibility of this author. Allegedly, she did not actually get her PhD from a reputable school, and allegedly not all the things that happened in the story she actually experienced or did. It is part of sociopathy to lie and embellish, so like there's a bit of a gray area there, and like, okay, she's telling her version of the story and her truth, which is fine, but when you're selling all these copies of this book and, you know, there are things that are allegedly false in it, it kind of raises some ethical questions. So for me, just not really knowing how I feel about that and what is actually true and what is not true about this author, and just not generally enjoying the book, I did have to give it 2 stars. Okay, moving right along, the first fiction book that I read in June was The Testament by Margaret Atwood. This was a reread for me. I actually haven't read the first one. I haven't read The Handmaid's Tale, which is absolutely insane since I've watched The Handmaid's Tale all the way through twice at this point. So I have not read The Handmaid's Tale, but I do have it currently. So I'm planning on reading it very, very soon. But that being said, I finished watching The Handmaid's Tale show. The last season came out and I watched that, and then I immediately wanted to read The Testaments again because I had forgotten so much about it. And also The Testament show is in the works, and I just wanted to remember like where that was going. And I mean, I loved it. I read it in a day. It was great. I gave it 5 stars again. But I'm just thinking to myself, how the heck are they going to get the show to where The Testaments is? And if you have read The Testaments and The Handmaid's Tale and watched the show, I'm curious what your thoughts are on that, because to me, it seems really, really challenging to bring the story to the place that The Handmaid's Tale ends, and the show ends, and The Testaments begins. I just don't know how they're gonna do it, but we're trusting that it's gonna be good. But I did have a lot of fun reading that again. Next up, we have Victorian Psycho by Virginia Fito. I don't have a lot to say about this one, unfortunately. I just felt like it fell flat for me. I feel like I don't have a ton of reasons why. It had all the hallmarks of a book that I would enjoy. It was a weird woman book, female rage, and I just felt like I didn't connect with the character. Obviously, she's supposed to be a psychopath, so she's not supposed to be relatable, obviously. And I normally don't have a problem with unlikable or unrelatable main characters, but I just didn't feel compelled by this story, unfortunately, and I had such high hopes for it, but it just wasn't for me. And that's kind of all I have to say about it. Continuing on with some disappointing reads, we have Supper Club by Laura Williams. I saw this one as I was looking for books on consumption, women in consumption, and I was really hyping this up in my mind and finally got around to reading it because I was like a afraid that I wouldn't love it, and unfortunately that fear came true. This book follows a main character who is starting this supper club with some of her friends where they have some kind of theme or idea that they're trying to execute in their supper club, and they just eat together, and it's sort of like growing your body as a social experiment. That's sort of the point of the supper club. So they are trying to gain weight and trying to take up space as a social experiment, or as like an art piece almost, which is an interesting concept, but I just did not feel connected to these characters. I didn't think that the way that it was executed was very compelling, even though the premise was very compelling and got me to immediately want to read it when I read the synopsis. I just didn't feel like it really executed on what I wanted it to, and I was disappointed by it, so I gave it 3 stars. Moving right along to another 3-star read, we have The River Has Roots by Amar El Motar, I think. So this book is set in a magical world where the magic system is grammar, and the 2 sisters that it follows have to sing to these trees, and it sort of follows their sister relationship and also the one sister's romance with another person from another kingdom. There's a lot of like shape-shifting and the water having transformational powers and the trees having magic. There's just a lot of like magic happening, and the magic system is kind of confusing to me, but the writing is beautiful. The sister dynamics are wonderful, lovely. I wished that there was more exploration of the queer relationship and of the relationship dynamics between the main character and the love interest, but that wasn't really the focus of the book. The focus was more on the magic and the sisters, which is totally fine, but this is a book that's very much outside of the norm for my reading. It was kind of shelved in like the speculative fiction section, I think, at the bookstore that I saw it at. So it is more of a magic, speculative fiction magical book, and I just don't normally read that, so I didn't connect with it as much as I hoped I would, but I still thought that it was pretty enjoyable, so I ended up giving it 3 stars. Moving right along, we have Chrysalis by Anna Metcalf. So this was another extremely hyped book for me. I was so excited about it, and this one didn't disappoint necessarily. It just wasn't a 5-star read, so I ended up giving it 4 stars. So it tells the story of this woman who is trying to get really strong and change her body at the gym, and it sort of explores her character from 3 outside perspectives. So it is very similar to The Vegetarian by Han Kang. I've actually seen people talk about how this is this author's take on The Vegetarian, so it seems like there was some inspiration there, with there being 3 external characters and the story only being told by them, not by the woman in question. So it is through the perspective of a random man who is infatuated with her at the gym and then starts a relationship with her, a friend of hers, and her mother. And it's really interesting, that perspective, because we never know what she is actually thinking and experiencing and why she's doing the things that she's doing. We only get the assumptions and the external view of her. And not only is she trying to bulk up at the gym, but she also starts this like YouTube channel and gets really famous from making this like content on yoga and meditation, making these videos. And it's sort of a commentary on that type of culture and this like need for improvement in the body and looking a certain way, and like the toxicity of workout culture. Like there are so many things that are covered in it, and the performative nature of all of that. So such an interesting subject and a really interesting perspective and execution. It just didn't feel like an absolute favorite for me, but there was no real like criticism or critique that I have for it. It just wasn't a favorite, so I ended up giving it 4 stars. And the cover, one of my favorite covers of all time. Absolutely love the cover. Next up, I have the book club book that I read in June, and that was Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. So I've read this one before. This was also a reread, and I gave it 4 stars this time. I think I also gave it 4 stars last time, but I liked it better. I thought it was a better 4-star, if that makes sense. I actually probably should have rated it 3 stars the first time I read it, because I don't think I loved it as much. It's been talked about a lot online, so I don't feel like I need to go super in depth into it, but it follows a woman who has worked at a convenience store her whole life, and everyone in her life wants her to move on, to get married, to do something else, thinks she's completely stagnant and wasting her life essentially, and she finds so much comfort in the routine and knowing her place and being a store worker. And the thing that was more interesting to me this time about it was the exploration of neurodivergence. So the first time I read it, I think I had seen more commentary on grind culture, on capitalism, and those aspects of the story, which definitely those are prevalent. But this time I was more interested in neurodivergence and whether or not the character is autistic. She does present in a way that feels very autistic coded to me personally and to a lot of the people in our book club. So that was a really interesting thing to think about this time that I read it. I really, really enjoyed it. I thought it was great. It still doesn't feel like a 5-star favorite read, but I'm really glad that I came back to it, because probably if I was not doing this book club, I probably would not have come back to it, just thinking it's kind of meh. But I'm really glad that I did, because I had such a good time with it. Okay, next up we have Disappoint Me by Nicola Dinan. So this book follows a trans woman, and she's in the wake of a breakup, and she meets this guy, and it's about their relationship as well as a health condition that she has to deal with and her relationship with her family. There's a lot of different things that are covered, but it is a character-focused story on her life and her experience, and it also follows her boyfriend and his previous experiences with another trans woman. So it kind of alternates in perspective, and I thought it was very, very well done. I really, really, really enjoyed it. I thought that it was introspective, and I thought that the main characters were both compelling and interesting. It felt kind of similar to the style of Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reed, in that it shows multiple perspectives and leaves a lot of room for nuance, and sort of shows the different ways that people's past mistakes and mess ups and how they've treated people affect the present. The idea of performative allyship, but then also excusing the behavior of someone else who's close to you. It brought up a lot of really interesting subjects, and I thought it was really, really, really well done. I almost gave this book 5 stars, but it just didn't feel like an all-time favorite, so I gave it 4 stars. But I very much connected with this book. I thought it was beautifully written. I loved the characters, and I had a great time reading it. So yeah, I'm really, really glad that this book did not disappoint me, because I had this on my radar for quite a while and wanted to read it as soon as it came out. So I was so glad that I was able to snag it on Libby, like literally only a couple weeks after it came out, which was so awesome. That doesn't normally happen, so I felt very, very lucky, but I really, really enjoyed this one. Okay, the last book that I don't physically have to show you was Nevada by Imogen Binney. I read this one in a vlog, and to be honest, I really, really liked it as well. It was another 4-star read. It follows a trans woman who works at a bookstore in Brooklyn and decides to go on a road trip to Nevada to sort of figure herself out. It is very introspective and character driven, and it is considered a cult classic, and I'm so glad that I finally got around to reading it. I'd only even heard about it like 6 months ago. I don't know how it slipped my radar, but I really, really liked it. I thought that the main character was very compelling. I thought that the storyline was interesting and compelling, so I really liked it. I don't have a ton more to say about it other than it was just an enjoyable book. And yeah, I really, really liked it, and it was kind of a timely thing for it being Pride Month, so I had a lot of fun with it. Okay, so the last 3 books that I want to talk to you about I have physically, and they are all fiction books. And the first one is Eat the Ones You Love by Sarah Maria Griffin. So this cover is immaculate. I absolutely adore it. I bought this one even though I was gonna be able to have access to it on Libby, but it was gonna come in like 20 weeks or something crazy, so I did end up buying it. And also I really wanted this cover on my shelf, and the end papers are really cool, so I wanted it as a trophy. This follows a main character named Shell, and she is sort of dealing with the aftermath of a really difficult breakup. I feel like a lot of these books are about the aftermath of a breakup, but anyway, she's dealing with that. She is living with her parents, and she's feeling kind of directionless, and she goes to the mall where she grew up, and there is this flower shop there that has a help wanted sign, and she goes in and meets the owner, Nev, and they begin working together and strike up a kind of flirty crush kind of relationship, or at least Shell has a crush on Nev. Nev is very secretive and a quiet character, and Shell doesn't yet know that there is a sentient orchid living in the mall and controlling Nev, and things get really fucking weird, and it is just such a romp. I think that for me, the only thing that held this back from being a 5-star read was a little bit the pacing, and also a little bit the not quite understanding the like magic system, quote unquote, or like how the orchid was controlling the people, and like how the orchid was consuming the people. Like it was kind of unclear, and like I think that was a stylistic choice, but for me, I just wanted a little bit more just to understand what was happening. That's the only thing that really held it back. It is kind of a slow burn. The like craziness doesn't really start until later in the book. A lot of it is spent learning about the main character and her relationships with different people in the mall, and her sort of completely turning away from everything else in her life and just becoming this floral designer, and just that being her only thing that she does. So she's just sort of doing this like complete transition of who she is as a person. And honestly, even though it was a slow burn, I really liked the sections that were talking about Shell, and just her character arc was really interesting. So I really liked it, but there were just a couple of things that kind of held it back, so I gave it 4 stars. Okay, finally, we have a couple of 5-star reads, which were very exciting. The first one is Body Friend by Catherine Braben. So this is another one that I have on Substack that I wrote a whole thing on, so I'm not really gonna like go into it super deeply. If you're interested, that'll be linked below, like I said before. But this one follows an unnamed main character, and she deals with a chronic illness and chronic pain, which is also not named. But after she has dealt with a hip replacement surgery and she's in recovery, she meets 2 friends. Both of them look like her and act like her in some ways, and they're sort of representative of 2 different aspects of her personality, or the extremes of her personality. She meets Frida at hydrotherapy, and Frida's a swimmer and she's very motivated, and she thinks that pain can be overcome mentally. And then she meets Sylvia, who she meets at the park, and she likes to sit on the balcony and drink coffee and talk and rest. So it's sort of up to the reader to interpret whether these characters are real or just manifestations of the cycle of chronic pain, and the different ways that you can look at chronic pain, as well as the different expectations that are placed on someone with pain. It is such a poignant book. The writing is so embodied and visceral and raw, yet so lyrical and beautiful. It just has everything I could possibly want in a book. So absolutely adored this, and just so incredible. And the last book I want to share with you in today's video is Open Throat by Henry Hoke. So this is funny because I literally just randomly came across it in a bookstore in New York, and I thought the cover was interesting and the premise sounded super weird and fun. But then after I got it, I've seen like so many people talk about it online. So I was like, oh, this must be a really good book. So it follows a mountain lion who's living under the Hollywood sign. And on the back of the book, the mountain lion is described as being queer. I think it's just that the mountain lion doesn't have a gender assigned to it. So that was really interesting as well. It was sort of an exploration of gender. But that being said, the mountain lion watches different people and is learning language and learning about humans through observing them. And it sort of tells the story of this mountain lion's journey when they have to enter into the main part of the city. So I really loved the writing. It was very sparse. The pages don't have a lot of text on them, and it's very short. I loved the main character. I loved reading from a mountain lion's perspective, and I just fell in love with this book. I don't even know what to say about it other than that it was so much fun and so weird and fascinating, and I loved the perspective. So highly, highly, highly recommend this one if you haven't heard of it or haven't read it yet. I really loved it. Okay, so those are all the books that I read in May and June. I had so much fun talking about them and reviewing them for you. If you've read any of these, let me know what you thought, and also what were you reading in May and June? I would love to know. I'd love to chat about it. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.